8 Years in a British Consulate by Zabina Eastman. This is recorded to celebrate the 8th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 8 Years in a British Consulate from 1861 to 1869 by Zabina Eastman, formerly U.S. Consul at Bristol, England, Chicago, 1919. Forward. This paper, now for the first time, is reduced to print by the son of the writer, who is moved by the thought that at present the analysis of British character will tend to a clearer understanding of the people by their American cousins. It is also of much interest as explaining the attitude of England to the United States during the Civil War. Biographical sketch. Zabina Eastman came to Chicago to live in the year 1842. He came with his bride and started his work, to which he had dedicated his life while a youth, the cause of abolishing slavery in the United States. Brought up on a farm near North Amherst, Massachusetts, an orphan while quite young, his early school reading impressed him with admiration for the Constitution of the United States, but accompanied with the painful thought that slavery in this republic was horribly inconsistent with the professions of liberty, and a blemish on our national escutcheon. He early concluded that in no other way could he be of greater use to mankind than to do all in his power to extirpate that national curse. He went into journalism. At 19 he had a small newspaper in Vermont. He speedily, after receiving his small patrimony from his guardian, lost it in newspaper ventures. About 1839 he came West to enter the employment of Benjamin Lundy, who was, as the representative of a small body of anti-slavery men, issuing a newspaper, the Genius of Universal Emancipation, in the town of Lowell, Illinois. Lundy dying soon after, young Eastman won the regard of the society by an eloquent editorial tribute to his lost leader, and was elected to fill his place, and continued the publication. The small number of its subscribers did not justify its continuance in that place, and the city of Chicago was coming to attract attention. So he went East to claim his bride in Burlington, Vermont, and came back to Chicago to start the Western Citizen, the name of which was changed in 1853 to the Free West. It continued till the cause of anti-slavery was merged in the new Republican party, and in 1856 he turned his subscription list over to the newly formed Chicago Tribune, and for a few years engaged in the lumber business, till the election of Lincoln and his appointment by the latter to the position of consul at Bristol, England. It was reported to him that Lincoln remarked to a bystander, while he was signing the commission to the position, that no appointment he had made gave him so much pleasure as that of Eastman. The following paper was a lecture he gave about the year 1872 in Elgin, where he resided for a few years after his return from England in the year 1869. The Chicago Historical Society has in its archives the files of his paper, a copy of the Chicago Magazine for the year 1857 edited by him, a memorial sketch delivered by Hon. Elihu B. Washburne at a meeting here in 1883, and a biographical pamphlet written by his son in 1886. He wrote a great deal on a variety of topics, many of them relating to early Chicago, published in the local papers. 8 Years in a British Consulate. It was at the close of the year 1861 that I left my country for my country's good. It was in the first year of the War of the Rebellion, and the gloomy period of our national life. Traitors both at home and abroad, in North as well as South, were endeavoring to popularize the disruption of the Republic. Treason was striving to appear the highest order of patriotism. As this was sentimentally and morally a gloomy period, so also was it the gloomy period of the natural year, the time the poet styles the melancholy days, clouds cast over the horizon. I departed from these shores with darkness upon the land, and plunged out upon the sea, cold with fog and sleet, neither sun in the heavens above, or light or warmth below, and this was the result of a long and boisterous voyage. Had I the time, I would like to impress upon my audience the sensations that myself and family felt on first approaching land on a foreign shore, a land covered with perpetual fogs, first getting a glimpse of the Welsh coast covered with snow, all cold and chilly on sea and land. Is such the symbol of the heart and sympathy of the people with whom I am to take up my abode? Gladly would I take you through the city of Liverpool, point out to you the dark and smoky shore of Birkenhead across the Mersey, where the tall chimneys and begrimed walls of the iron works and coal yards look as if they were the barriers of the infernal world, and tell you that there the lairds have their works that built the Alabama, and note the greasy blackened tone and condition of the streets and buildings and the very atmosphere. And remember, not often is there in the canopy above a sun to be seen, and no sky. Now go with me through the interior of the country on the railroad, a day's journey to the south, through that marvelous land of industry where all is a garden or a workshop. Go with me into another city that dates back to the days of the Romans, where everything is still more old and strange to a Yankee, where there are streets so narrow that two teams cannot pass, where the buildings overhang the paving so that neighbors can shake hands across the way. Hear the everlasting rumble of street carts over the strong paving, and still enveloped in fog, and the sun not yet seen in the land, and feel that is to be your home for years. Such pictures I might draw to you, all in the background of gloom. But I have other work before me. I wish to occupy your thought on this occasion in the delineation of the state of feeling in the time of the War of the Rebellion, and give you some idea of what the people thought of us and the doings in this land during that time. Such was the moral condition of my first entry into real life there. It seemed as if the fog and chill had gone into everything, into the heads and hearts of the people. Pass over all this and go with me to that old city on a chilly morning in December, with the fog so thick that one could feel it, and that he could never get out of it, and blundering through the narrow streets to find the place where I ought to belong. I finally came out upon a broad green square, surrounded by venerable elm trees. Just then a light breeze tore a rift in the clouds and rolled them suddenly over the Bristol Channel, and the sun burst out clear, the first time I had seen it for some days previous to leaving my native land. It was not like the sparkling brilliancy of our western country, but clear and icy, like a great opal in the sky. Then, almost at the same instant, I first saw, flying from the top of its staff, on the opposite side of the square, the flag of the United States covering the consulate. Welcome sight to the wanderer from home, the patriot in a foreign land, the sun in the heavens that warms his home and his kin and the land that has given him birth, and the flag that is a symbol of his country, that protects him wherever he roams. I passed in reverently under the flag flying its best at the top of the staff. I stood under its protection within the consulate of the United States, its prospective chief. I announced my name to a clerk at the desk, who looked up with suppressed surprise, yet with a knowing recognition, putting on some extra touches of importance. They had seen my name in the newspapers some time before as the coming successor. He informed me that I had been expected for some time. Men with the salt water cut about them sat loafing by the open coal grate, lifted up their heads with an inquiring look, taking their first survey of one with whom they would soon have to take counsel and some direction. These were the captains whose ships and legal relations pass under the jurisdiction of the consul while in port. I was ushered into the interior, to the august presence of the consul, in fact, as the incoming one. He received me with dignified formality. Being a tall, stately man, who had seen much of the world, he was at ease, and prepared for an imperial interview. He evidently wanted to impress me with his importance. Should I ever become such as he? I had never before looked upon a consul. This man had been appointed by Buchanan, had held office in some form from Jackson downwards, far down. He also bore the title of colonel. Now I had no title, never yet held office, never had sought for one, in all the ways and airs of an office holder, was green. And I had been appointed by Lincoln, a man then in the estimation of such without prestige, and invited a sneer from that school, and who promised a demoralizing administration initiated in the overthrow of the Democratic party. After some preliminary skirmishing on general politics, against which I did not care to put in a dissent, and at the great degeneracy which had fallen upon the official character of the country, and the impossibility of the Black Republican party being able to run the machine, as he styled it, he condescendingly volunteered to me considerable useful information and advice. In the first place, I had an edifying dissertation on the character of John Bull, their out-of-date style of doing business, their contemptible philanthropy and sympathy for the niggers. Upon these thrilling topics he fulminated with great dignity. He rose from his seat, and planting himself in front of the fire, his back to the mantel, and spreading his coat tails like a pair of shears, to the exhilarating effects of the warmth in the rear, uttered great swelling words of ponderous wisdom, interpolated with greater oaths, several sometimes in a single sentence, and at the very climax threateningly raised his hand above his head, and swore a terrible oath he had ever been true to that flag, letting his hand quiver with tragic effect, ever true to that flag that floats above us, and shall ever remain so. But he had no sympathy, or part, or lot with the damned abolitionists. He would settle the trouble by hanging 50 on each side of Northern abolitionists and Southern agitators. Thus being relieved of his surplus patriotism, he placed his cigar, which had remained smouldering on the mantel, in his mouth, and puffed vigorously away till he brought new life to its faded end, and elevating it to its proper altitude, he puffed out sweet clouds of incense, and sent them rolling to the ceiling, alternately knocking off the white ash, as at intervals he proceeded in oracular demonstrations. They were to the effect that the captains should be made to feel their social inferiority to the consul, the philanthropists kept at a distance, tramps, beggars, and sailors, with their yarns of bad usage, sent about their business, and if they don't move pretty quick, said the valorous consul, I make them feel the toe of my boot, suiting the action to the word with appropriate direction of the foot. Bravo, grandissimo, presto, marvelous, anything. Are these the qualifications for this office? Am I worthy to be the successor of such a predecessor? Must I smoke in this artistic style? Must I play the tableau of the kangaroo before the fireplace? Must I set my plain speech with all the grand utterances of the ancients with their gods? Did Mr. Lincoln, when he sent me here, suppose I had these duties to perform, and special qualifications therefor? I began to realize my incapacity. Remembering the summary of all was in the toe of the boot, I instinctively let fall a glance to the floor, as one does abashed, and gathered some confidence, for fortunately, as a protection on shipboard, I had procured me a heavy pair of Connecticut pegged boots. Are boots or brains to run this consulate? If boots, then am I sufficiently armed and equipped. I am not found lacking. Let this be a matter for the consideration of your Civil Service Commission, that all candidates for consulates be examined on the qualifications of boots. As for other qualifications, I will not swear, I cannot smoke, I never enjoy the comforts of a fire in a particular style unless I am alone. In the matter of kicking, I have had but little practice since I left the cradle, but that art can easily be acquired with a proper pair of boots. I think I will try the consulate, using what little brains I have before resorting to other expedients." The interview closed with my predecessor producing from the consular safe my exequatur from the Queen, and agreeing upon a certain day when his accounts should be adjusted, he would turn over to me the office, its archives, flag and flag staff, etc., which was done. I became a full-fledged consul. The duties of a consul are rather multifarious. He is a commercial officer, not a diplomatic, an agent of the government through whom international business of both peoples partaking of a legal character may be performed. In seaports his duties mainly pertain to the shipping. He administers the marine laws. He is to the captain a lawyer, justice, judge, and jury, and constable. That is to say, he advises, judges, and executes the law. He is a notary also, taking acknowledgments, administering oaths, executing legal papers, and certifies to the legality of other papers, and bridges over acts of legality between his own and the foreign country to which he is sent. He is universal counselor for all parties. His office is a general intelligence depot. Any countrymen of his, or of the country to which he is stationed, come to him for all sorts of information and for help in all kinds of trouble. I think of no kind of knowledge or information that would not be useful to a consul. The people with whom he resides sometimes imagine he knows everything, can do almost anything. The people who are taught to reverence authority pay great reverence to a consul. He sees every variety and phase of human life. The experience in a consulate is a perpetual novel. There is romance in it, there are scenes of stern reality, some things rich in humor, and other times incidents of tragic effect to someone in connection with his duties. He, as one of the most common of his services, is solicited to recover or hunt up lost estates. It is marvelous how many people there are, on both sides of the water, who think they are greatly beholden to some ancestor of a far past generation in making them heirs to vast estates, and then tangling them up in the web of time. Soon after my arrival in Bristol, I was invited and received a platform ticket to attend a lecture by my former acquaintance of the Peace Congress, Henry Richards, of the London Peace Society, on disarmament of nations. I made a remark at the close of the lecture that it was a good lecture, and might now be well applied in getting our rebels to disarm. At that he seemed much offended, as if I had personally insulted him, whereas I meant no such thing, but rather to give point to his argument. Some might think that looked like a joke, but I never joke on solemn subjects, for Richards was a solemn one. He was then editor of the Peace Herald. I watched his course, and frequently met him for some years, and I never knew him to say anything against the slaveholders fighting, though war was pictured by him as an awful crime, legitimate war, and before the rebellion slavery a great crime also, but seemed of a sudden to lose that character. I had a curt way of stating the case for these men, who for holy principle withdrew their sympathy from us, that all war is sinful except war in defense of slavery or in rebellion. John Bull doesn't show much warmth yet. Just after this came the deluge of the Trent. There was awful indignation, you may believe, with the John Bulls. They tore around as if they were already in our china shop. I felt as if I were the only one in a minority on that question. Yet I believed then and now that it was wrong and an unfortunate affair for us. The streets were placarded with patriotism, buses ran with inscriptions "Self-Defense." It was very much in England as it was in the North when the rebels fired on Fort Sumter. Wilkes had fired the English heart. In those days I attended a parlor meeting of the philanthropists to hear a paper read by Mrs. Fison on the sanitary condition of the poor. Most of those gathered probably knew who the Yankee was, though I was introduced to but few. A very gentlemanly man sat by my side, and made some remarks about the state of feeling on the Trent, after introducing himself. A year afterwards he spoke of the interview, and told my response in regard to the Trent imbroglio, which I remembered not. It was this: "It does not seem like my being in an enemy's country." This seemed to go right to a tender spot near an Englishman's heart. Yet I told him the truth, notwithstanding the indignant outcry. They talked about giving us a sound whipping, to make us mind our manners, as a mother whips her child, but the talk was not like the talk of an enemy, or as they would have talked had France or Russia been the aggressor. That man was my true and even intimate friend all the time I was in England. After the great Chicago fire, 3 years after I had come away, his love for our country continued, so that he was the first to head the list, and worked up the contribution which resulted in a gift of $11,000 to our stricken city. Now I call that a pretty fair investment of a few civil, not to say kind words. As a coincidence, the sentence I had used had 11 words in it, just $1,000 for a word. In these days of exterior sadness as well as gloom, before the season of the fog lifting had come, when it was drizzle, drizzle almost every day, so that in fact when corrected in my statement that it rained every day in England by a good Quaker, it was proved that there were 14 days in 3 months in which it had not rained in any part of the day, I accepted the correction. I found there was a warm place near John Bull's heart, as with other people, and cheerfulness seemed to be gathering, and this I found without the least compromising my place as a thorough American who stood up for his country. About this time, the Trent turmoil, a sensible man from London, the late John Cassell, of the great publishing firm, came up to Bristol to speak for peace, and to stem the tide of the unreasoning populace, those who felt John Bull had been hit in a sore place. He told them plainly they might depend upon justice from our country, that they might have faith in Lincoln, that the war was for slavery, and was resisted by an anti-slavery government. Alluding to Garibaldi, whom they had recently honored as one of the greatest men on earth, he said he might of himself make one exception to his own countrymen, that was Cromwell. (Slight cheers.) He would certainly make one other exception as the greatest man that ever lived, and that was George Washington, the father of the United States. At this name the hall was rent with the cheers of the large audience, and such a cheer as I never heard to the name of Washington in our own country. Washington's name is revered there, as here, as if he had not been the great rebel against their government. John Bull began to appear in some of his varied characters. He is a queer animal, cold, stiff, and stubborn, arrogant and distorted, expresses his opinion unreservedly, without delicacy. He is a lion in his war, can act the part of a lion when necessary, yet at times, or in spots, is as gentle as a lamb. He is a wise man who can fully comprehend John Bull. I do not pretend to be that wise man. Some of the incidents of consular life will entertain while they show the characteristics of the people. I had been but a week or two in office, when a man, very lean, smooth faced, mild, and slow of speech, came to my office to make known the case of a destitute seaman, who had left one of our ships, and was now lodging in a low sailors' boarding house. I told him I would do what justice required and the law allowed. I finally put the sailor upon relief. Then the sailor's friend took quite an interest in the way I was about to discharge consular duties, studied an old consular manual, searched the records of the office, and took special interest in a certain extended protest made before I was in the office. He wanted a copy. I told him he could have one by paying for it. The paying took him quite aback. It finally came out that he was getting up a claim for salvage against a ship then in port, which had suffered much damage in the Channel, and afterwards got into port and was then repairing, and that the sailor whom I had just fed was the assumed claimant, and had been kept for the purpose; that himself and a shipbroker as principal were working up the case, all for the benefit of this poor sailor. What disinterested benevolence! Of course my services were somewhat necessary in the process. Just then I knew little about salvage, but I volunteered what I thought was a common sense statement of the case. No person engaged under pay of the ship can claim salvage for saving her. This man had impressed me, or attempted to, as a philanthropist. I remember how at our first interview I scrutinized him, contemplating the noble character he was about to manifest, endeavoring to recall his portrait, which must have been in Dickens, but I could fix upon no name that just fitted him. Now it became necessary for me to refuse several things they wanted me to do to enable them to carry out their intent on the ship. I could see nothing in it but blackmail, or an attempt to put the ship to some expense which it might buy off. But I said nothing to the captain. Soon I found that a formal complaint had been made to Mr. Adams, the minister at London, for my maladministration of office. Mr. Adams seemed to side to their view of things. In the meantime I had found out some things about the customers who wanted to trade on me. The philanthropist was an adventurer, always playing second fiddle to somebody else's villainy, and without visible means of support. We will, for shortness, call him Uriah Heep, whom he resembled mostly for humility. The other and principal was a shipbroker, who had broken himself while engaged in breaking others. One of his late cases was to environ a Swedish vessel, and to entangle the ship, and so bewilder the master in trouble, that in despair he cut his throat. In my response to Mr. Adams, I gave him the character of the man, said the principal was like Micawber waiting for something to turn up, without Micawber's honesty, but wickedly bent on making something turn up; and if there was any throat cutting to be done, it was not my throat that was to be cut. The ship sailed, and no libel was laid upon her by the liars fastening upon her. Soon after this hunchback brought me a significant note from a solicitor, enclosing a bill, which I was requested to call at his office and settle. I was for the snug little sum of £300 ($1,500) for my neglect of duty toward the sailor whom I had fed. I had discharged him when he refused to go on his ship, and sent him on his way rejoicing, so the claimant was out of their reach. Afterwards came other bills by this same hunchback, whom I named Quilp, in all to the amount of £2,000 ($10,000). There were now 4 villains in the play: the philanthropist Heap, the messenger hunchback Quilp, the lawyer Nameless, the broker Broken, resembling Micawber. Quilp came and said he was ordered to wait my answer to the last bill of the lawyer Nameless. I ordered him to leave my office, and he left. Then came in a bulky fellow, face red and glowing, whom I supposed was the principal broker, whom I had not then seen to know. With quite an air of politeness, asked me if I had received such and such letters. Their object was to get some word from me that they would swear was an admission. I quite coolly wanted to know what right he had to ask me any such question. He then said a man downstairs had asked him to come up and inquire, and wanted to know what answer I had to make to the accounts. I thought of my predecessor's use for boots. Surely there is a place for everything, and a time for everything. That man has a place for my boot. But the stairway was steep and crooked, the man 50 pounds above my weight, albeit much of it was beer. I felt more confidence in my brains, though in small quantity. Tell the man that sent you here that I claim to know how to run this office. I want none of his help or advice. Should I need him, I will send for him. I believe he was the chief in this cool, impudent attempt. Those bills, £300, £500, £1,200, etc., are yet unpaid, and I never heard more of the combination. Occasionally I would meet one of them. They seemed to be growing more and more seedy, as if getting ready for planting. Quite a prominent part of my duties was to look after the fitting out of ships for running the blockade of the Confederate coast, sending in to the rebels goods, arms, and ammunition for the prosecution of the war on behalf of slavery. Probably 40 ships were fitted out or touched at my port, every one of which came to a bad end, sunk or captured. Some of them, however, made several successful voyages. One of them, the Old Dominion, so called, was being fitted out in Bristol. Hearing about it, I employed a photographer to plant his camera like a cannon in a vacant house on a convenient elevation opposite to it, and he took several good views. I sent them to the Department of State with explanations, together with the recital that the captain had boasted that no damned Yankee was smart enough to capture this ship. This was forwarded through proper channels to the commander of the blockading squadron, and the ship was captured in her first attempt to break through. A copy of this picture is in the archives of the Chicago Historical Society. The loss of that noble English ship, as the London Standard called the Alabama, produced quite a sensation. The sinking of it came near to many an English heart. Great many exulted in it, as we did at home. The celebrated Geneva arbitration in 1871 assessed England $15,500,000 damages for the depredations and destruction of the American marine caused by the Alabama and a few sister ships, which were fitted out either in England or in English colonies, and established as international that such conduct is forbidden forever. There was undoubtedly great sympathy with a majority of the English people for our rebels, and hope for the destruction of the American Union. This is strange to those well posted in English philanthropy, and those not well posted on the general character of the country. The whole was quite unlike, yet just like, John Bull. It was quite natural as it was for the demagogues of this country to sympathize with the East India Rebellion, and to prophesy foolishly the end of the great Eastern British Empire, as they foolishly prophesied the end of the Republican Empire of the West. It is better generally for Englishmen and Yankees to know something before they prophesy. John Bright said it was the English habit to sympathize with everybody's rebels but their own. We had many strong friends in England, led by John Bright, the noble John Bright. This man, a patriot of the highest order, who, because he loved his country, desired her always to be right, if not going right, would sound the warning, and who loved other countries as a part of humanity, whose aspirations are for justice and right and liberty to their subjects. This man, it was natural, should be with us, though with, at first, a majority of his countrymen. They were early set adrift by our own bungling of the politicians on the slavery question, their trying to save slavery and save the Union also, and also by the conduct and teachings of men in office abroad, a traitor in almost every consulate, and a traitor representative in almost every court. I always told the English people the cause of the war was slavery, so I told them in a public address as early as the spring of 1862 that the war would end slavery. The worst state of the feeling after the Trent was about the time of the destruction of the Alabama, not because of its destruction, for on the whole that went in our favor. That occurred on Sunday, and good Sabbath day's work it was. My pastor, Reverend Hebditch, who from indifference became a fast friend of our country, always prayed for us in our calamity. That day he prayed most earnestly that the right might triumph. Just as he had said the words, as one of his parishioners the next day computed the time, the ball of the Kearsarge struck the Alabama in the hull. Our minister was noted for his efficacy in prayer, and this cause of right made a good hit. And it also hit many a man near the heart, for great respect was had for the Alabama as the avenger of the Trent. While some of our cousins were sad, some were glad, and Americans abroad were jubilant. One of our captains in port put out his pennant, a long streamer with stars and stripes cramped at the butt end, and from the masthead let it fly. The collector, or other officer of her Majesty, ordered our captain to take it down. He referred to the consul. I said to him to keep the peace, obey the law. If any law, let them show it to you. I gave no orders for any captain to strike his flag. If not satisfied, let them come and take it down. It did not come down. The English people are very wise in their own conceit about money. There is nothing like English gold, and investments in their consols called the funds. Now, all this is a sign of patriotism, and we ought to respect every people for their patriotism. But they will take gold from any nation gladly. American gold, even in eagles, they do not by any means despise. They like investments that pay income. All values of investments are measured in this sensible way: what will it pay? They would not invest in our bonds. They have not much faith in paper money. They are great sticklers for the specie basis. Their own pound and £5 notes are the only kind of paper that compasses their faith. The greenback, the name by which our money is known the world over, was a term synonymous with humbug or swindling. General Greenback was the name of a big Yankee villain with many mean villainous traits, who was the prominent character in a play on the London stage, which had a popular run. Slur upon us in the day of our heaviest misfortune in this General Greenback took prodigiously. For a long time they were very chary of investing in our bonds. Not until they approximated to par, and therefore not very speculative, that they were placed on the stock market. The English took pretty largely of Confederate bonds, the artful fellows who brought them out having based their redemption on cotton, and cotton at that time was a better basis than gold, if they would get it. Thus was John Bull taken in. He always had great faith in cotton, and well he might have, for it was the manufacture of it that made his country rich. I had, however, the opportunity of giving my opinion on investments in American securities, and perhaps $100,000 of bonds were taken on my advice, and I guess none of the investors were ever heard to complain. We formed a valuable acquaintance with a gentleman and his family, Charles, son of Governor Fairbanks of Vermont, of the great firm of manufacturers who, like the Leviathan, their scales are their pride. He was an invalide, as the English say, seeking his health abroad. He stayed near us for 2 winters at Clifton, a suburb of Bristol. He employed to cure him of his many ills a distinguished physician of that aristocratic suburb. At the time our bonds were at the lowest, this friend of mine said to his physician, "You had better invest in American bonds. They are sure to double soon in value." The man of pills replied, "We don't like that kind of investment. We have quite enough of your repudiated securities, the Pennsylvania bond, you know." This conversation was told me. I said, "You give my compliments to your physician, and say to him the U.S. Consul is authorized to redeem all Pennsylvania repudiated bonds, and will pay back interest at a higher rate than is paid for your consols, making them better than English funds." This was told him literally, but the bonds were not forthcoming. In place he sent me the last volume of the writings of Sydney Smith, containing his letters to the Morning Chronicle on Pennsylvania repudiation. I acknowledged the favor with thanks, sent back the book, and word that the letters were very interesting, but Sydney Smith was foolish, because by his satire he had helped depreciate his own property, and had sold out at 45 cents on the dollar, whereas he might have had par if he had kept them and not sold them in a passion. But while the noise and fury were all one way, and the way the aristocracy led, against us, for aristocrats abroad as well as at home generally lead the low impulse of any people when they attempt it, we had a strong minority of strong friends. The middle and intelligent classes were with us. The press there, as in this country, too often the organ of mischief, and too often blinds more than it enlightens, was against us, and it was hard to get the truth before the people. Facts were perverted, prejudice enlisted, and it was only great and startling facts which were positively against representations of the press that began to convince the people that they had been led astray. Such was Lincoln's re-election, for it had been represented that his war policy was against the will of the people, and it with himself would be overwhelmingly repudiated. And another was Sherman's march through Georgia. First he had gone, never more to reappear on the surface. The heroism of the South was to swallow him as the whale swallowed Jonah. But when he did come out, then the next phase was that he had passed through the country as an arrow does through the air, without leaving a trace behind. But when at last it was known that his course was a devastated path of 60 miles in breadth, in which the people had been made to feel in awful manner the ravages of war, then next it was simply barbarism. But the truth began to appear against all this perversion, that the South were in actual rebellion against a government of their own choice, and were meeting the just condemnation of traitors. The South, they said, can never be conquered. The attempt is hopeless, therefore senseless, and unjust and cruel. They had all the heroism, all nobleness, all justice. They were chivalrous and gentlemanly, and had all the generalship, etc. If it were not so, then thinking men began to inquire, why does not the South prevail if the North does not? At last spoke the great newspaper, the Times, called the Thunderer, whose boast is, it reflects the times. The South is slowly bleeding to death, and it is giving the last throes and convulsions that forecast death. Now it is not the part of sensible people, and especially of practical John Bull, to reverence and stand by a sinking cause. Human nature rather worships success. It is not the higher order of idolatry to worship the setting sun. And then it was we began to have justice done us in the sentiments of the people. The people were ahead of the press. Sherman kept on his march through the Carolinas no longer as an arrow. The armies enclosed Richmond. There is generalship on the part of the North. This illustrates it. There is a group of canary birds exhibited in the cities for the amusement of the children, in which the greater canary drives the others, who draw him in a coach. The driving canary before this has been called General Lee, and the boys cheer him. Now the canary that rides as well as drives is General Grant, and he is made to order about General Lee, and condemns him to be shot, and shoots him, and the rabble cheer the successful canary, General Grant. Straws show the wind. The newspapers can hardly yet show it. On Good Friday morning, the day on which President Lincoln had ordered the repossession of Fort Sumter, with appropriate congratulatory exercises, a most abusive article appeared in a prominent daily paper on President Lincoln, his bloodthirsty, heartless persecution and prosecution of a hopeless war to subjugate a noble-minded people struggling for liberty, alluding to the proposed celebration that was to take place that day, and it compared the President to a Nero and all the other cruel monsters of the past, and there was no protest against the article or expression of disapprobation. Conservatives in politics, those externally courteous, had taken no pains to express sympathy, congratulation, or condolence at any phase of our national condition. We were "gaeing our ain gait to ruin." So we might go. Not a straw would be laid across our path to arrest our downward course. But a few radicals of the Liberal party, for that party was not all for us, got up a congratulatory meeting on the re-election of Mr. Lincoln. It was mobbed down in one of the large halls of the city. In place of that they got up an address, which they had beautifully engrossed and illuminated on a large sheet of parchment, and transmitted it to Lincoln. Henry Ward Beecher did a wonderful amount of good in enlightening the English mind by eloquent addresses. No telegraph cable had been dropped as a cord of sympathy and intelligence across the great ocean. We had these telegrams to Cape Race, and steamships taking the messages to the western coast of Ireland, and transmitted to Europe, giving news from New York with only about a gap of a week in the chasm of time. Nothing had been heard of the folly of the celebration of the restoration of peace over the ruined embattlements of Fort Sumter, or the capture of Jeff Davis. A week from that bad Good Friday had passed. About midday in rushed to my office a gentleman, name to me then unknown, whom I had often in the past 4 years passed in the street without salutation, said he, "Is it so? News has come that your president has been assassinated. Is it so? Have you heard? Perhaps you don't know me. We have never spoken. My name is Canning. I am a conservative. I have had but little sympathy with your country. I wanted you broken up. But if it has come to this, I have had enough. I have come to express condolence over such a calamity, and my abhorrence of the act." He had been mayor of the city. This was to me most astonishing and alarming intelligence. I telegraphed to London, to the minister. It was too true. The answer was posted up at the commercial rooms. Then came the spontaneous expression of a whole people who had been brought suddenly to comprehend a new order of things, a truth that had lain dormant between two of the greatest and really the most friendly of nations, brethren in fact, by a great calamity that had fallen on one and which reached the heart of the other. It was the end of all bickering. It was the end of all misdirected ill feeling. The newspapers, forgetting all the past, uttered another voice. The one that had the week before denounced Lincoln as a monster now honored him as a martyr. A great meeting was held in the same hall where a few weeks before a mob had broken up a meeting held to congratulate the martyr on his reelection, and presided over by the mayor wearing the gilded chain, the symbol of his office. And great and noble speeches were made by orators from all sides. They had all discovered the great and good qualities of the man who had struck the fetters from the slave, and saved his nation, and sealed the work with his martyrdom. On that mournful event Parliament held a special convocation to express the sense of the nation, and did express the sentiment of the world. The great leaders of both parties, in both Houses of Parliament, followed one after the other as representing the grand divisions of public opinion, and uttered most eloquent words, wonderfully expressive and appreciative of the character of the great President, in language that has become the standard literature. Our children will in some day read in their school books the eloquent eulogies pronounced upon his memory by the greatest orators and men of the British Parliament. This they did while the body of Lincoln was being carried in solemn procession across the half of the continent, and all the people followed as mourners, as if not only the father but the savior of the nation had departed. Then it was proved at last that while ill feeling was being engendered, while harsh criticisms were being made, and while Lincoln with a sad heart was bearing the burden of the country in his soul, he did it with a cheerfulness in his countenance which would have imparted hope and cheerfulness to the nation. It was with a tone of sad pleasantry, or with rich humor, or characteristic story and appropriate joke, and terse epigrammatic utterances of great truths, all which were armed with wondrous power to lead the people right. Then it was that it was proved that the world had been studying the character of this marvelous man. And when that life was ended by the blow of the assassin, then it was shown that the world had learned him, understood him. In the chapel where I attended the next Sunday, our minister, of whom I have spoken before, preached upon the life and character and great work of the marvelous man of this age, and eulogized that character, and portrayed the great work he had done in a masterly manner hardly to be equaled by any American. And he gave him the everlasting and honorable title of Lincoln the Good. End of 8 Years in a British Consulate, by Zebina Eastman. Read by Maria Casper.